Agus gan daith is Christiante ag an scanil a gúrum sláinte Yanni agus Charlie ar fod an state. Agus taréis muinin a bheiliú ag go leor daoine tan rialtas a gríomh mar loch féhanna. Agus tá fragart áibh se doling neclaise le seo. Tá tuismorí muin sin na bhlas a go fáil a nearnú ábridí ar Yanni gan bheith nó gan chorú agus níor seo mai go leor. Minister, children's lives have been devastated by the litany of failures in healthcare, and the public have been listening in real shock and in real anger over recent times. On Tuesday, we had the damning report on how unauthorised springs were implanted into 3 children during spinal operations. And the failure to protect these children is an absolute disgrace. But this is a pattern of broken behaviour when it comes to children's healthcare. It's the same hospitals over and over again, and this government standing back and acting as a spectator in all of this. We see it in the scandals of hip operations being carried out on children when those operations were told weren't needed at all. Patients are receiving letters about this scandal, Minister, only in the last couple of weeks, but information released to us this week reveals that former Minister Stephen Donnelly was informed a year ago about this, and the current Minister was briefed back in February. We're talking about the possibility of young children put under the knife and their bones being sawed into, traumatic surgery, children between the ages of 1 and 7. It's beyond the worst nightmare of any parent. And why were these parents kept in the dark by the government for so long, is the question they're asking us. We know that 561 children must now be independently assessed following the audit covering the years 2021 to 2023. But that's only 2 years, Minister. What we don't know is how many children are actually affected. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Just how bad is this? Because we're being contacted by parents whose children's cases reach back a decade and further. The emails and the phone calls, they keep coming. It's looking like 2021 to 2023 is only the tip of the iceberg. It goes way beyond those 2 years. Minister, one horrified parent contacted us this week. His daughter was a patient in Temple Street in 2016, from the ages of 1 right up to the age of 3. A consultant diagnosed the child with hip dysplasia and was adamant that she needed surgery. That surgery would have required, in his words, sawing into her hip bone and reshaping the socket. Because the child never showed any symptoms, the parents sought a second opinion from a specialist orthopaedic surgeon in the north. That consultant concluded that their daughter didn't need the surgery, didn't have the condition. He said that he was horrified that a doctor had made such an error of judgment, and that he said he was going to inquire about this. This was years ago. The parent went on to tell us that the stress that they've been under during this time was nothing like they've ever experienced before. That isn't the only case we've heard of people getting a second opinion to be told that there is no condition here at all. Minister, catastrophic failures in children's healthcare have been known for a long time. It's the job of government to sort it out, not to sit back as spectators. And at what point does the government take responsibility? When does this come to an end? Minister, you need to get to grips, and your government needs to get to grips with the scale of the hip surgery scandal. The families deserve answers. They want to know how many children are involved, how far back does this go, when will children be informed if their child was operated on unnecessary, and will you commit to expanding the scope of the audit beyond the narrow 2 years so that all children, all parents get the answers they need? And finally, Minister, how is it that a health minister has known about this for a year, but parents are only being told about it last week? Where is the open disclosure? Where is the compassion in that?
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for raising this question. I think we've all been utterly appalled by the information that we have received and that we have been made aware of this week. Firstly, as you've mentioned, the information on the HICWA report, which sets out very clearly that a number of springs were implanted into the bodies of 3 small children. And these were springs that were not medically approved. These were springs that were corrosive and can be corroded. And this is what happened. The devastation, the pain, the hurt that has been inflicted on these 3 young children, on their families, is unimaginable. And this government and Minister Jennifer Carroll McNeill, as Minister for Health, is moving and will do everything possible to support those families, to understand absolutely what has happened here, to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and to make sure that if any other child is impacted, that can be identified and that child and their families can be supported. Most importantly, with the HICRA report that was published this week, the recommendations that were set out in the report are already being acted on. So 9 recommendations specifically for implementation by the CHI. You have 9 recommendations specifically for HSE, and you have further recommendations, and many of those are being acted on. As well as that, you have the chair of CHI that has stepped back, and we welcome that. You have the surgeon at hand who is responsible for this, and let's not step away from or doubt ourselves or question the fact that this is an individual here who decided to put these non-surgical instruments into children's bodies. That person is suspended, and we need to make sure now that the hospital can operate, and where there have been downfalls and where proper procedures have not been followed, that changes. In relation to the developmental dysplasia of the hip and operations here, again, it is absolutely unimaginable that children would be put through surgeries where it's not needed. There's none of us disagree with that, Deputy, and every single one of us, any of us who have small children, the idea or the thoughts that a child who is already in pain and already struggling would have to go through a surgery that is not necessary is absolutely appalling. There is an audit taking place. That audit is being carried out at the direction of the HSE and the Minister for Health. That audit is carried out at the moment and is being carried out at the moment. It is important to say that there's no information at the moment to say that any patient safety incident has occurred. At the same time, I'm not going to predict, nor can anybody predict, the outcome of that audit. Parents and families and children are being written to, those who have had operations in recent years, but I agree, if this is something that stretches back further, if there are potentially more children or families that need to be written to, that is exactly what has to happen here. If proper procedures were not followed, we need to understand why, and if there are changes that need to take place, we need to understand why too. But we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We need to make sure that our board is still in place, that we can still progress the plans for our National Children's Hospital, that any of the recommendations that have come out of the HICRA report this week, that they can be implemented swiftly. We also have to make sure that any recommendations that come from the audit around the hip operations, that they can be swiftly impacted and swiftly moved on as well. The Minister for Health has met with the new CEO of CHI. She is working closely with the new CEO, with the HSE, and has been very clear that if any further measures need to be taken, if any further expansion of any review or audit needs to be taken, if any changes need to be made in our hospitals to make sure that children are safe, that they are protected, and that this does not happen to a single other child, that is exactly what she will do, and she will be supported fully by government in that regard.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Doherty.
Minister, your colleague, the Minister, the former Minister, knew about this since May last year. Parents were finding out last week. And you're absolutely right. As a parent, imagine thinking that that was your child. You know, the draft report is published, and the draft report has found that hundreds of children would not have needed this operation. We now have other information that I've put on the record here since 2016, where second opinions were sought, where the parent talks about the child was going to go under the knife, have her hip sawed into, a second opinion sought, said, you don't need the operation. She doesn't even have the condition. She's currently enrolled in gymnastics. This is a scandal of huge magnitude. This is not a lone incident. We've put on the record other cases that we've come to us where people got second opinions only to be told the exact same thing, that this condition did not exist in that child and this child is now thriving. So the audit is looking at 2 years and 561 children have to be recalled. If this goes back as far as 2014 or 2016, we're talking potentially thousands of children. So I'm asking for government to stop being a spectator. You knew about this for a year. Do you believe that your colleague, the Minister for Health at the time, should have been open with the families, and families shouldn't be just finding out last week?
Firstly, Deputy, government is not a spectator here. This was brought to the attention in September of 2023. The Department of Health was notified the year after, and a subsequent review has taken place, is taking place, and is at an advanced stage. The number of people who have been contacted is increasing, yes, and there is further work underway through an action plan that's currently being drafted to try and identify any further groups that are not included, that haven't been included, that should be included in this review. Because I agree with you, Deputy, we all agree if any child has had surgery where that was not necessary, where it shouldn't have happened, we have to know about it. We have to identify them, we have to be able to engage with their families, and we need to make sure that they are supported and that this never happens to another child again. It's the same for the surgeries that we learned about this week. Again, the idea that materials that are corrosive when they touch moisture would be put into children's bodies is absolutely appalling. So there's none of us think that this is okay. There's none of us think that what's happened here should have happened. And every single one of us on this side and on that side of the bench, we will work together to make sure that the children that need to be identified are, but that measures that need to be taken to improve the procedures in our hospitals, that they need to be taken and that people need to be protected at all costs.
Thank you, Minister. And just before I move to the next speaker, I'd like to welcome in-house here observing MP Liam Conlon from Beckenham and Penge in London, as well as who is accompanied by it. We have lots of observers in the gallery, a lot of school children, so we welcome you all here today. And we move now to the SOC Dems Deputy Jennifer Whitmore. Please.
Thank you very much, Ciarán Comhairle. Minister, I'll just wait until Sinn Féin leave their seats. If we could just stop the clock, please.
Move quietly.
Minister, parents are trying to protect their children from an online world, and they're getting increasingly overwhelmed and anxious about it because their children are carrying around in their pockets probably the biggest threat that they'll face for many years, and that's just their phones. The Netflix show Adolescence brought this danger into stark relief, and it showed an extreme case of the tragic consequences of toxic online content. For parents, what the show demonstrated perfectly was the helplessness they often feel. And I don't know, Minister, if you watched it, but it was a very, very tough watch as a parent. We think our children are safe when they're at home with us, but the reality is we often have no idea of what they're looking at online. Parents are doing their best, and so are schools, Minister. In my constituency in Wicklow, the It Takes a Village initiative was a huge success. As part of that, all 8 local primary schools introduced a voluntary no smartphone code, and under the scheme, parents signed up to not giving their children a smartphone until they went to secondary school. And I know other schools around the country are doing similar. And mobile phone bans in both primary and secondary schools are now pretty widespread. I mean, I don't know any school that isn't throwing everything at this problem because they know how serious it is. But the difficulty is that that toxic content is still there when the children leave the school, when they go outside the school gate and they turn their phone on, and that's where we need to protect them. One study has found that it took just 2 minutes from setting up an account for teenage boys to be fed harmful content. The content was misogynistic, violent, extremist and racist. Within 2 hours and 32 minutes of setting up that account, nearly 80% of the content being recommended was harmful. The dangerous content, it is endless and it is relentless, and has been deliberately funneled into children's accounts on a doom loop. Social media companies are making billions from feeding our children this toxic material, and we as legislators are standing by and allowing it to happen. A new report from the Children's Rights Alliance has warned about a lack of regulation online, but I want to just deal with one specific aspect of that report, and that is the lack of regulation of recommender algorithms. And these are the algorithms that continually feed this toxic material to children in this dangerous online bubble. There is no escape from this endless scrolling, harmful and the toxic content in it. Initially, Commissioner Mann had included measures to address these poisonous algorithms in the online safety code, and this was really welcomed at the time. But for some reason, those proposals were removed. According to the Children's Rights Alliance, this was a big mistake, and the removal reduces safety for children online. So, Minister, do you agree that these algorithms should be turned off? Do you think it was a mistake for the Commissioner Mann to remove this regulation from the online safety code? And will you work with us across the floor to change this and make sure that online spaces are safer for children?
Deputy.
Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. And I suppose similar to the previous question, I think all of our priorities here and the priority of this government is to make sure that children are safe be it online, be it offline, be it in their homes, in their bedrooms, within their communities and in their schools. And it is an absolute priority to make sure that children are protected. I think the world that we live in is changing, and certainly for young people, the world of online, of social media, technology, it's part and parcel of their world in a way that it wasn't for so many of us when we were young. And we know the benefits that that brings to their lives and to our lives, to our work, the way we communicate. But we all can very clearly see, as you've just outlined, the pitfalls and the challenges that young people are facing, and the dangers that they're facing online as well. And so there is much that we need to do. You've mentioned Commissioner Mann. We are the first country in Europe to set up and to establish an online safety commissioner, and the sole focus of that commissioner is to make sure that we remove harmful content, that we remove illegal content, and where companies don't comply, that there is a very hefty fine at the end of the day. It's up to 20% of turnover, 10% of turnover can be fined, or up to €20 million if they don't comply, if content isn't taken down, or if they don't comply with the codes of conduct and their own rules. And it's really important, as our Online Safety Commissioner establishes themselves, that that is applied and that companies know that that will be used. As Minister for Justice, my priority was making sure that our laws were tough. Coco's Law was the first law I introduced, which made it illegal to share harmful content online. So much of what we're seeing, unfortunately, with young people, where there was personal content being shared, and the harm that that causes young people is absolutely insurmountable. And I'm pleased to say that that's something that young people are now aware of, and what we need to make sure is that it actually changes behaviour, not that we're penalising young people. The issue, and you've touched on this as well, of violent pornography, we're seeing more and more, and access to this is so readily available for young people. The knock-on implications when it comes to domestic and sexual violence is absolutely horrific, and we're seeing this at a much younger age, and that's why we need to make sure everything that we do, that we're talking to young people, that we're engaging with them. And I watched adolescents, and I have to say, one of the things that stood out to me the most, while every single episode there were certain elements that I think made all of us stop and think. In the second episode, where the police officer was speaking to his son in the school, and the son said, you don't get it. This is what they're saying to each other. This is what this means. So we need to talk to young people. We need to understand how they're communicating with each other. We need to teach them how to deal with certain types of content, how to deal with certain types of engagement. But I agree, insofar as possible, protect them from it as well. So I fully support the ban in primary schools. I think it is absolutely necessary. I don't think any child before secondary school should have access to social media, and so there's a role for all of us parents to make sure that when a child leaves school and comes home, they're not on social media at night, they're not in their bedroom able to access who knows what, that there are controls on any apps that they're using. We also need to make sure that in our schools and through our education systems, we're providing that support, we're engaging with young people, and we have a lot of programmes through WebWise, through the Department of Education, that are already being rolled out in that regard.
Thank you. Look, Minister, I agree there is a role for everybody in this. I do think parents are playing their part. I think schools are playing their part. I know incredible teachers that are really doing everything they can to address this issue. We need government to play its part. And I acknowledge the work that you did in relation to Coco's laws, where you talk about, making sure that it is illegal to share graphic or toxic content. But what we're allowing the social media companies to do is to share that, and not only share it, they are promoting it, and not only are they promoting it, they're actually making billions from feeding this to our children and creating this really toxic environment that they are growing up in. And no matter what we do as parents, or no matter what the schools do, if they're continually seeing this for hours every day, it will seep into them. We need to stop it at the social media level. We need to make sure that those content providers are held accountable for it, and they need to turn off the algorithms. So can you just answer, do you agree that those algorithms need to be switched off?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. I suppose from a government perspective, our view, my view, and I know that of the Minister for Communications, is that the era of self-regulation is over, and it has to be over. And so the Online Safety Commissioner needs to ensure, and I know that she will, that our strategies and that their strategies focus on what is actually happening here, and that includes algorithms, and I fully agree with you. I think that these need to be dealt with. The rabbit hole or the doom scrolling, as I've heard it referred to recently, I mean, the impact that that's having not just on young people's concentration and their ability to focus, but where it's leading them, where it's taking them, is absolutely detrimental. So I fully agree with you. I know that the Minister for Communications is meeting with all of the social media companies in the weeks ahead, is obviously closely engaged with the Online Safety Commissioner. I've spoken to her myself, and will certainly be making sure that our engagement through education is absolutely front and centre of the work that I do. But we have to make sure that we're dealing with every element. So how do we support parents to deal with this at home? How do our schools make sure that our teachers and that the programmes that we're rolling out are helpful for children? And how do we make sure that at the end of the day, the social media companies who are not engaging, not taking down content, not sticking to their own codes of conduct, that they're either fined or that there are even greater repercussions?
Thank you, Minister. Now we move to Deputy Roderic O'Gorman.
Thank you, Count Corla. Minister, the renewed slaughter in Gaza has now claimed hundreds more lives since Benjamin Netanyahu broke the ceasefire on the 18th of March. And in that time, we've seen the overall death toll from Israeli attacks break 50,000. The UN Human Rights Council reporting on the destruction of maternal and reproductive healthcare facilities. And now another war crime with the massacre of Red Crescent medical workers. And the lies that were told by the Israeli Defence Forces about the circumstances of their death have now been revealed. The renewed killing by the Israeli government has entirely undercut their justification of the war in seeking to free hostages, a point made clear by the tens of thousands of Israeli citizens demonstrating against the broken ceasefire. In the recent past, Ireland had taken a leadership role within the EU. We led in the call for the review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. We participated in the ICJ case on the occupation that was decided last July. And in May of last year, we finally recognised the state of Palestine. But that active role has changed since the US presidential election, and particularly since the general election here. Minister, I put it to you that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have made a conscious choice that Ireland will take no more political leadership in relation to Gaza in the lifetime of this government. And I put it to you that the government will never pass an occupied territories bill. Not the comprehensive version that's already cleared the Shannon, not the weak, not the watered-down version that you propose in your own programme for government. When, in the face of war crimes, in the face of ethnic cleansing, in the face of genocide, we should be redoubling our efforts, your government is stepping back. It's time for honesty now. We know what is happening in Gaza is a monumental crime. Does our country still stand for a world in which powerful states cannot trample over human rights and extinguish thousands of lives? Or do we allow this new fear created by global strongmen to overpower the deep-seated humanitarian instincts of the Irish people? Minister, if I'm wrong in my belief that this government will take no more political steps to support Palestine, tell me how you'll prove me I'm wrong. Once committees are established, commit here today to a committee-stage debate on the current Occupied Territories Bill and let the opposition bring forward amendments to deal with issues that have been raised. And if you're not prepared to do that, will you at least tell us when the Minister for Foreign Affairs will bring forward the government's watered-down version of the Occupied Territories Bill for debate in this House, so we can at least assess what benefit, if any, it can bring to pressurising Israel to stop its slaughter?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, for raising this matter. And could I just at the outset acknowledge your role and your leadership in the previous government in making sure and in supporting the previous government so that Ireland was to the fore in supporting Palestine and supporting a two-state solution and calling for the release of hostages, the unconditional release of hostages. But I do utterly reject your assertion that this government has in any way changed in that position or that view. And can I assure you, Deputy, and indeed deputies in the House and every other person listening, that this still and remains an absolute priority and is central to our foreign policy in the Department of Foreign Affairs and into the work that we do as a government. And in fact, this issue will be raised at the Foreign Affairs Committee on Monday, where the Taoiseach will attend in Luxembourg and where they will engage with Palestinian authorities. And the Taoiseach will be relaying our very clear commitment, and that is to a peaceful solution, that is to a two-state solution, that is to the absolute need and necessity for humanitarian aid to be let into Gaza, but also for the unconditional release of hostages. I too Deputy, I'm utterly appalled by the resumption of airstrikes by Israel, and I utterly condemn that. I utterly condemn the murder of aid workers and hospital workers over the last number of weeks, people who were found with their hands bound with bullet wounds. These were not people who were shooting on anyone. These were aid workers who were there to protect people. And really, I mean, this is a war on children. In the first week since airstrikes resumed, there were 1,000 children who were maimed, murdered, and there were thousands more who are at risk now, who are at millions at risk of starvation. And so our priority and our focus has not and will not change. You'll ask, what have we done in the last number of weeks alone? In the last number of months, we've given 20 million more funding to UNRWA. This is the only organisation that we know, even though they're not being led at the moment, but this is the organisation we know can support Palestinians. That is on top of funding that has previously been provided, 72 million in total to protect. You've mentioned the ICJ case. The Attorney General made an interjection, and as part of that, following the ruling, and you're right, last May the 28th, we recognised Palestine, but what we have been doing is constantly pushing forward when other countries are pushing back. We've worked collectively with our colleagues in Europe, in particular Spain and Norway. We have used our platforms, be it in the European Councils, be it on an international stage, be it in the visits that have happened over the last number of weeks and months, to make our position absolutely clear. What is happening is wrong. The murder of innocent children and civilians is wrong. The resumption of airstrikes is wrong. The preventing of humanitarian aid into Gaza is wrong. And the fact that hostages have not been released is utterly wrong. And I condemn Hamas and the fact that they are continuing to cause this and continuing to inflict pain and harm as well. And so our focus has to be in making sure that the ceasefire deal that brought about some bit of reprieve and a stay and a pause for the millions of people, that is resumed, that is put back in place, and that aid can be immediately brought back into the millions of people who are suffering, and that the hostages can be released.
Deputy O'Gorman.
Minister, we see slaughter in Gaza every single day, and in light of that, it's not enough to rely on the things we did last year. The Occupied Territories Bill is a concrete act that fulfills our obligations under international law, legal obligations that were made clear to us last July by the decision of the International Court of Justice. 3 weeks ago, just down the hallway, the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, told myself and other members of the Oireachtas, if things keep going this way, it will be the end of Palestinians in Palestine. Those were her exact words. We don't need to look at the images on our screen. We've been warned in this very building what is at stake for the people of Palestine. But in the face of mounting atrocities, your government's response is to step back from the leadership role. And this is most clearly demonstrated by the fact that your government will never pass any Occupied Territories bill.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
It is in the programme for government. We've said very clearly that we will implement it. The Taoiseach, I know, is meeting with Senator Black in the coming days. Senator Black is the member of the Seanad who brought forward this bill, and she herself is very clear that we need to get this right, that this is not straightforward. You're right, it's because of the ruling of the ICJ that the situation, that the dynamic that we're working in has changed, that we are now able to bring forward this legislation, but we do have to get it right. We do have to make sure that there aren't unintended consequences, and that the objective of the bill is to help bring about a lasting peace and solution, and that has to continue to be our focus and our priority. I mean, it was referred to earlier on in the week, the hatred that has now been instilled in so many people. It's difficult to see how there is a solution here, how there is a way forward, but we have to keep that focus, we have to keep that ambition and that priority. And this Monday in Luxembourg, when this is discussed at the European Council or the Foreign Affairs meeting, that's exactly what the Taoiseach will be doing. That's exactly why he travelled to the Western Bank recently, to not just engage with our own troops and our soldiers who are there in peacekeeping missions, but to make it clear that our objective, our goal is to work with every single person here to try and bring about a peaceful solution and to end the suffering of millions of people.
Now we move to Deputy Peadar Toibin.
Minister, information released to AIN2 following a parliamentary question has shown in recent days that in the last 3 years, Children's Health Ireland have cancelled more than 160 operations for children in Crumlin and Temple Street Hospital due to the lack of intensive care beds. Now, these are cancellations for very serious operations for children who are very sick. 9 of these cancellations were for heart operations for children. 10 cancellations were for children needing serious orthopaedic surgery. There are just 23 paediatric intensive care beds in Crumlin and just 9 in Temple Street. And many of these children and their families have waited years for what, in some cases, is life-saving surgery, only to get the heartbreaking news that the surgeries have cancelled. Now, I repeat, 161 cancelled surgeries for children in just the last 3 years. An incredible figure, Minister. Now, there was no clinical reason for the cancellation of these surgeries. The surgeons were there and they were ready. The operating theatres were ready. The equipment were ready. The very sick children were fit for the surgery, but there were simply no beds for these children to recover in. It's an absolute scandal. We've just come from COVID-19, when the talk about was the necessity for intensive care beds in this country. Now, obviously, CHI have been in the news for many other reasons in the last couple of weeks. The implementation of unapproved non-CE marked springs into children, which were made from corrosive material, resulting in significant pain, suffering and stress for those innocent children. That alone is a scandal of enormous proportions. And yet we have heard in the last 2 weeks as well of reports of hundreds of unnecessary hip operations carried out in 2 Dublin hospitals. 79% of the hip operations carried out in Kappa and 60% of the operations carried out in Temple Street simply did not meet the threshold necessary for the surgery. And as you can imagine, those parents are sick to the stomach in relation to what happened. Now, the Taoiseach Simon Harris was Minister for Health, and he promised that no child would have to wait for a scoliosis operation for more than 4 months. Yet today there are children currently waiting for up to 3.5 years for that operation. Fine Gael stated that they wanted to make Ireland the best country in Europe to be a child, but not if they're sick, not if they're waiting for surgery, not if they need a scoliosis operation. How does a child developing a curvature in his back of up to 125 degrees achieve that goal? How does an unapproved experimental spring put into a child achieve that goal? How does an unnecessary operation for a child achieve that particular goal? We in Aontú have raised the issue of accountability so many times in this chamber. Why can't you move from recognising there is a crisis to implementing accountability? Will you remove the board of CHI, or will you allow them to remain in place after such devastation to so many children?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. I think the knee-jerk reaction or the response to anything that goes wrong, to just sack or to remove people from a board, doesn't actually help anybody. It doesn't actually change the fact that we need to make progress, that we need people in place to be able to make sure that the Children's Hospital can be open, to make sure that any recommendations that come from the reports that we've just discussed today, that they can be implemented so that there is accountability. Sacking everybody makes absolutely no impact and has no positive impact on the young people that you've mentioned, on any of the young people and their families that they've mentioned. What you also never do, Deputy, is recognise or acknowledge the fact that there's significant investment has gone into our health services in recent years. Our health budget has increased by nearly 40% in recent years. And there will always be challenges that we need to overcome and that we need to do better. But a 40% increase in our budget shows that this is an absolute priority for this government. We have 28% or 28,000 people who have joined the health workforce in the last number of years. We have more people than ever who are being treated by our healthcare service. We have progress being made on waiting lists. We have more people in hospital beds than ever before who are getting hospital beds than ever before. And when it comes to scoliosis and spina bifida, I mean, I acknowledge this is the most traumatic and difficult experience that any young person could go through. This is their life. This is what they have to deal with. And so this is why this has been a focus and a priority for this government. In recent years, included in the 40% that I've mentioned, there's €30 million has been allocated to help tackle waiting lists for spinal procedures. In last year alone, there was 513 spinal procedures were completed. This is a 10% increase on the year before, and of course we want to do more. It's a 35% increase since 2019, so we are making progress, and it's important, Deputy, that you might acknowledge the fact that there is progress and there is investment being made. We have a dedicated paediatric spinal surgery management unit established just last year in 2024 in CHI, and it is working to coordinate services, to implement strategies, to drive continuous improvement, to address any challenges. on top of which you have a ring-fenced theatre in Crumlin, which provides additional capacity for spinal surgeries, as well as outpatient clinics that are taking place where spinal outpatients are being seen. So there's a lot of work that's happening. There's a lot more we need to do. And in relation to what's happened this week, the HICRA report, it is absolutely appalling, and I'll repeat again, appalling, that equipment or that devices that are not medically approved, that are corrosive, would have been put into the bodies of anybody, let alone a small child. And every single thing that can be done in terms of overhaul of structures, of management systems that are in place that need to be changed, that need to be improved, that will happen. And the Minister for Health is working very closely with the CEO of the hospital, with the HSE and with the Department of Health and this government to make sure that that is the case. But this is a priority for this government, supporting and protecting young people and children and making sure that they get the very best health care that they are entitled to and that they deserve will continue to be a priority for this government.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Toibin.
Minister, these are not challenges. These are hundreds of children damaged because of wrongdoing in these hospitals under your remit as a government. The word appalling does not equate to accountability. They are not the same things. Standing up here and saying how shocked you are does not actually change things at all. We had a mother on primetime during the week discussing about the fact that there are numerous reports written into similar situations with dozens of recommendations that are simply never implemented. The parents do not trust the government to get this right. You talk about priority. There is obviously a new National Children's Hospital being built. But CHI, in an interview, talked about the fact that there will be more intensive care beds in those hospitals, in that hospital. But they actually said in the same interview they cannot say that those beds will actually be opened when the doors of the hospital will be opened. The interviewee stated they don't know exactly when those new beds are going to be open. There is no clear time scale for those beds to be open, to change the situation where hundreds of children are having their operations cancelled. Give us a clear time scale today and we will believe you.
Well, Deputy, there'll certainly be no time frame if you want the entire board sacked and removed. We'd have to replace them. We'd have to make sure that progress then can somehow continue without a board. You can't make progress on opening any hospital bed, any acute hospital or having any surgery in the new hospital if you don't have a board. So let's be realistic here. What do we have to do? We have to act on the facts that we know. We have a report that was commissioned by HICRA which clearly says there were children operated on with medical devices that they shouldn't have been. We are acting. The person responsible, and we all have responsibility here in this House, the people who have carried out those operations, the people who chose and made those decisions to have operations on young children who didn't need them, they have to be held accountable too, and they will. And any changes that need to be made in the hospitals, in the management, in the structure, in the procedures that clearly led to what has happened here, if they have to change, when they need to change, that will happen, and government will fully support Minister Jennifer Carroll-McNeill and the hospitals to make sure that that happens. But simply removing a board, simply trying to delete a really important part of this is actually going to delay things, and it's not going to help a single person that you've mentioned.
Thank you, Minister. We now move to other members, and it's Deputy Micheál Carrigy for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Concorla. Minister, in August 2024, the Autumn Innovation Strategy was launched by Government. Today I am asking the Government to action their pledge in the programme for Government to place this strategy on a permanent legislative footing. This also must be followed up with the appropriate investment and implementation. The strategy contains over 80 actions